Beneath the quiet hills of Lynchburg, Tennessee, there's a cave that never stops breathing. Cool air drifts from its mouth, carrying the faint sound of running water, a constant, steady trickle that's been flowing long before Jack Daniel ever filled his first barrel. It's called Cave Spring Hollow, and it's a heartbeat of Jack Daniels. For more than 150 years, every drop of Jack Daniels whiskey has started right here, from the same underground spring. The water emerges at a perfect 56 degrees, clear and cold, after winding its way through miles of limestone rock that strips away impurities and removes iron, which, if left in, would ruin the flavor. The limestone leaves behind traces of minerals that soften and round the taste, creating a water unlike any other in the world. That's why no other water has ever, or could ever, do for Jack Daniels what this one does. You can't fake it, you can't replicate it, and you certainly can't replace it. The people at Jack Daniels know this. They protect that spring with fierce loyalty. Hundreds of acres of land are preserved around it, guarding it from development, contamination, or disruption. The distillery itself was built right beside the cave, not for convenience, but out of reverence. That water is the foundation of everything. Every mash, every barrel, every drop. If you change the source, you change the whiskey. And it's the same true in leadership. Every organization, every team, every leader, we all have a water source. It's a place our clarity flows from, our values, assumptions, beliefs, and purpose. It's what shapes how we lead, decide, and communicate. When that source is pure, when it's grounded in truth and filtered through time, experience, and humility, everything downstream runs clear. But when that source gets polluted by ego, fear, or urgency, it clouds everything it touches. The message, the culture, even the results. Before we talk about goals or growth, sometimes we have to stop and ask, what's feeding the clarity that flows through our work? Because just like that spring in Lynchburg, Tennessee, the purity of what comes out will always depend on what's at the source. As you heard in the opening, there's a cave in Lynchburg, Tennessee. Cave Spring Hollow, the quiet stream that's been feeding Jack Daniels whiskey for more than a century and a half. Same spring, same cool 56-degree water, same limestone doing the invisible work of filtering out what doesn't belong. That water is the foundation of everything they make. Pure, steady, protected. Because they know, change the source, and you change the whiskey. That idea is where we're headed today. Why foundations matter. In leadership, in business, and in life, just like in distilling, what's upstream always shapes what comes out of the barrel. You can't out-age bad water, and you can't filter flavor back in later. It's the foundation that decides the finish. I'm Steve Muscato, and this is the Crafted Clarity podcast, where we distill the tension between what we've built and what we're built for. Every pour, every plan, every purpose has a process of refinement. Here, we talk about clarity, confidence, and significance, not as buzzwords, but as the essentials that give your life and leadership their character and depth. Each episode takes on a principle worth thinking about, and it filters them through a real-world experience, just like a good distiller filters what doesn't belong. And today's conversation is about what's beneath it all, your foundation. Because whether you're building a business, a brand, or a life, the quality of what you pour will never exceed the clarity of what you're built on. So, a while back, I worked with a small business that had started to lose its rhythm. They were good at what they did, respected, trusted, the kind of place that people generally wanted to support. But as they were growing, things started to get a little off course. They weren't in trouble. In fact, sales were steady, but the pressure was mounting. They wanted to keep growing like they did in the early years when everything felt new and full of momentum. So they started to watch the competition a little closer, trying new tactics, copying what others were doing, and what seemed to be working for them. And slowly their work stopped feeling like them. While they hadn't lost their foundation, they were starting to pull from a different source. The water that once flowed from authenticity and service had been replaced with a mix of comparison and urgency. So we helped them look upstream, back to where their mission and direction had always come from. Not by giving them the answers, but by asking them the right questions. Questions like, what made them unique in the first place? What did they stand for before success started speaking louder than purpose? It wasn't easy at first, but they started tracing it back upstream. They began to recognize the difference between what was theirs and what they had borrowed, what they had copied. And once they got back to the original source, that pure, steady flow that had built their reputation and their confidence, well, everything downstream began to align again. Their decisions got clearer and made more sense. And for the first time in a long time, they knew what to say no to. As we learn from master distillers, the output, the whiskey, it's always shaped and defined by its source. The key isn't just to find your foundation once, it's to fiercely protect it, the way Jack Daniel's protects theirs. And that's what I find more often than not. When things start to feel off, it's usually not a downstream problem. It's a source problem. I've seen this play out with organizations, teams, and individuals alike. When alignment with who we are slips, whether it's in our work, relationships, or goals, when energy drops and things feel heavier than they should, it's rarely because we've forgotten how to do the work. It's usually because we've lost the connection with why we do the work. And that's not a flaw. It's what happens when we stop protecting the source. Here are 3 things that I've learned. What's upstream always shows up downstream. If your decisions are rooted in fear, urgency, or comparison, it will show up in the results, even if everything looks polished on the surface. Just like you can't out-age bad water, you can't out-execute misalignment. Purity doesn't happen by accident. Even the purest spring won't magically stay pure. It has to be protected. Jack Daniel's guards its water with vigilance because it knows everything depends on it. Clarity works in the same way. It requires intentional maintenance. Without regular reflection, even the best among us will start operating on autopilot, reacting instead of leading. Guard the barrel, not just the bottle. Distillers know it's the barrel that gives the whiskey its character and flavor. In the same way, we all have to guard what gives our work and our lives their flavor. Our values, our integrity, our sense of purpose. If you lose those, it doesn't matter how polished things look, the taste will change. And while we often talk about this in the context of leadership and business, it really applies to anyone. Anyone trying to grow, create, lead, or simply live with more clarity and confidence. The good news is that you don't have to figure this out alone. Sometimes those upstream questions come from the people around you, your team, your peers, your customers, even a close friend who senses when something doesn't taste quite right. Other times, it helps to bring in an experienced third party, someone who can help you slow down, ask better questions, and help you trace things back to your source. That's the work I love, helping people and organizations find alignment between what they say and what they do and what they stand for, so the clarity at the source stays pure. Because whether it's whiskey or life, success isn't about how much you can produce. It's about protecting the purity of what makes your work worth sharing. If you've been sensing this type of attention, maybe things are heavier than they should, or life isn't flowing like it used to, this might be the moment to look upstream, to pause and to trace things back to the source. While we're talking about leaders and organizations, this applies to anyone who's trying to make progress and to stay grounded, or to get back to what truly matters to them. Because clarity, purpose, and alignment are human challenges, not just leadership ones. So ask yourself these simple questions. First, did something change at my source? Sometimes we notice misalignment downstream in the results or the energy or relationships, but we don't stop to ask where that started. So take a moment to think. Are your decisions and actions still flowing from conviction, or have they started to come from comparison or urgency? Because what's upstream always shapes what's downstream. Second, is something clouding the water? Every organization and every individual picks up sediment over time. These are habits or pressures or assumptions that once helped but now just make things murky. Filtering that out will require awareness and honesty. So what noise or distraction has crept in that's changing the taste of your work or your life? And third, what's worth protecting? Jack Daniel's guards its spring because it knows everything depends on it. What's your spring? Your mission? Your values? Your relationships? Your sense of purpose? If you distilled your work or your life down to what's essential, what would remain? These questions aren't about adding more to your to-do list. Like the distilling process itself, they're about understanding what might need to be removed. What needs to be filtered out so what's true can rise to the surface again. Because clarity isn't something you find once and forget. It's something that you return to, protect, and refine again and again. When you go to a whiskey tasting, you jot down notes that remind you of what stood out and what you want to remember. Here are my tasting notes from today's conversation. Yours might be a little different. First, what's upstream always shows up downstream. You can't fix what's cloudy at the source by polishing what's downstream. Second, purity doesn't happen by accident. It takes vigilance, the same kind Jack Daniel's shows when they guard that spring, because everything depends on it. And third, the whiskey, the output, it's shaped by the source. So is your life. Protect what gives your work and your world its flavor and integrity. And while we've been talking about leaders and organizations, these lessons apply anywhere clarity starts to slip. In your work, or your relationships, creativity, or even in your calling and purpose. So here's your reflection for the week. I'd like you to think about one area in your life or work that feels off right now. Something that maybe feels heavier or slower than you think it should be. Instead of pushing harder downstream, take a look upstream. Did something change at the source? The water in Lynchburg hasn't changed in more than 150 years, and that consistency built one of the most recognizable whiskeys in the world. Not because they kept adding more, but because they never compromised on the source. That's the kind of consistency we all crave in our work, in our relationships, in our faith, and in our purpose. Because when the source is right, the rest flows. So as you head into this next week, take a moment to check your own water source. Protect what matters, filters what doesn't, and remember, it's the foundation that decides the finish. Until next time, stay curious, stay clear, and remember, clarity isn't found, it's crafted. Thanks for listening to Crafted Clarity. If you're a leader wrestling with the tension between success and significance, or you're trying to align your work with a deeper calling, I'd love to connect with you. If your organization is facing questions about strategy, whether it's alignment, ROI, or building confidence in your team, this is the work we do every day at iBrand. And if you walk this journey yourself, or maybe you're right in the middle of it, I'd love to hear your story and maybe even share it here on the podcast. You can find me at craftedclarity.net.